All right. So good morning, guys. This is Laura Wiederhaft from White Spider. She was in the data analysis course. I don't know that Laura learned anything. She was pretty advanced and experienced when she came through the course. But anyway, how long you got in the field now, Laura? Since you
So coming on to ACDS, I was a business analyst for a year. And then so I've been at White Spider for a year and a half now. So have kind of transitioned from being a data analyst to doing more of our data engineering and pipelines,
oh
but
yeah.
still pretty heavily involved in like the reporting. We use BigQuery and Google Data Studio for most of our dashboards. We're planning to transition since like we're growing too fast and it's hard to scale with Google Data Studio as your only solution, but it's done a remarkable job getting us where we are now.
There you go. So yeah, Laura is um, relatively new to the field, just like you guys. So I thought I'd have her come in and show us Google Data Studio and BigQuery, which are completely in your browser. You don't need to download anything, but you do need a Google Cloud Platform login. But it's just just another tool, another way of getting things done. I believe, all three big cloud providers have similar capabilities. I know there's an ML Studio in Azure. I don't know that there's a, a, a data studio type of product.
There is, so Google Cloud has there's several different types of programs you can run in the cloud. Like BigQuery, and you can use like your data sets that you store in BigQuery to run programs and processes. So there's a bunch of different like feature sets within Google Cloud. Some of them are free, some of them are not.
Mm,
But
there you go. Well, I will hush and let you move on
yeah,
with your presentation
I
and further
think
introduction, whatever you
I
want to.
need screen sharing permission.
Yeah, advanced options. Who can share? All participants.
Perfect.
Maybe now.
All right. So BigQuery is completely in the browser, which makes it, in my mind, really easy to get up and running quickly. The other benefit is Google has a public data set that you can use and a marketplace of data sets that you can explore. So if you want to add data sets or search for different things that you're interested in using, Google has a robust set of data sets that you can just start working with that are totally free. So that's what we'll be using today to kind of do some data exploration. So the user interface is pretty standard. So we have a query editor where you can just start writing queries. But Google does quite a bit to kind of help you along the way to get your queries written. So if you're exploring data, every data set lives under a project, and every project has different data sets. And usually this is kind of a way to organize if you have several different tables that are similar or share a primary key. If you're joining a lot of different data together, often you would want it in the same data set, basically. So,
Hey, Laura. I don't know that I ever really was clear about describing what BigQuery is.
yeah, so it's
Um,
a data warehouse solution, basically. So BigQuery is an alternative to Azure or Redshift. So it's a basic data storage solution.
it's a relational data warehouse where you can put relational database, but it's not made to be the back end for any sort of processes, right? Or an application or anything like that. It's really made to upload data and then analyze it.
Yeah, so it doesn't do much in terms of like a application interface. It's just a storage solution.
Yeah. And
I would
it's
say.
relational. So you got SQL, and that's really the primary way of digging through this stuff is with SQL, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Cool.
rarely, I mean, you can via API connect your data warehouse with Python, but usually working with SQL is what we do.
There you go. Okay. So I apologize for that. I don't know that I ever really clearly said what this tool is. All right. So there you go.
Yeah. So within the public data sets, you can kind of start to explore different things that you might be interested in. So they have one thing I've been kind of browsing through, like from an exploratory standpoint, is all of the COVID-19 data that they have available. And this might be a good starting point for us to just kind of look at everything that's available. So once you can look at the schema for a data set, and it can help you kind of get kicked off and start a query. So once you have kind of an idea of what's available in these data sets, you can either query and it'll start your query for you, or if you're just interested in certain columns of data, you can click through them and they'll help you. It'll just start getting added to your query to kind of give you a kickstart and pull this in. So let's just preview this data, and then we can do a little exploration in Data Studio. Cool. So we're able to get a quick preview of the data if we want to take a look. I'm just going to query. First, I'm going to find out what dates we have available to us, and maybe that can help us craft a query that maybe looks at cases over the last couple of months. So we could do date is in SQL a function. And so if you have a column named date, I try never, when I'm creating data sets, to never name my columns things that are also functions to prevent this from happening. But anytime you're working with something that's also a function, but also your column name, these backticks are the way that Data Studio specifically specifies that you're calling out something in the table.
That seems to be pretty common in MariaDB, the MySQL. I'm still using that same MySQL and Workbench, and I think there's a status or something like that column, which is a reserved word. So yeah, anytime you're dealing with a reserved word, you stick it in, and it's backticks, right?
Yeah, it's backticks. It's a weird, not an apostrophe. It's
it's the backtick.
Yeah.
Upper left corner.
I'm interested in how recent this data is, and it looks like we're even seeing data flow in from the 10th, which it's not the 10th yet here, but I noticed when I was doing the data exploration that we have data from other countries. So it's possible that it's already collecting data from countries where it is the 10th. So we have very current data in this data set. So now I think I would want to maybe query a subset of this data so we can just look at cases this year. And we'll just pull in the full data set so we can see everything in Data Studio. And then I'll just replace this. And then dates in Data Studio have double quotes. There's just some differences between this and other SQL languages. So let's do everything since the beginning of the year. This might be too much data. So this is gonna give us 11.25 gigabytes. So basically, BigQuery will warn you about how much compute power you're going to use. And once you're up and running in Data Studio, even like doing the public data sets will bill your account. So I try to be smart about not pulling more data than I actually need. So I'm also maybe gonna put in a condition here where we're gonna pull for like one, just let's look at one country maybe, or maybe just North America. So I'm gonna go back and look and see if there's another good way to filter this data down further. New confirmed. I think let's we can also do a shorter time frame. Let's do since June. I'm not getting.
Ooh, 500 columns.
Yeah, so maybe let's just select. It might be good to work with a smaller data set here. So we have, why don't we look at hospital beds? And then let's look at our dates here. I don't know if this has dates associated or if this is a total hospital bed. This looks like a more reasonable data set to start with. So I'm also just gonna check the dates. Okay, so looks like we just have 2020 data here, which is fine. That's gonna give us enough to at least start doing some data exploration. So all right, so once you have the results of your query, what you can do is you can either start saving the results and working with them in a different program, but you also have the option to start exploring with Data Studio. So Data Studio has like two main features. One is an explore tool, which can quickly allow you to start understanding your data a little further. Actually, I think they've merged to just start with the general report. So Data Studio has three main components. There's the data component where you can add in other data sets. So you're able to add anything like from a file upload. You can add any BigQuery tables that we have. And then you're also able to pull in a custom query. So if I wanted to write, for example, we do a lot of client dashboards at White Spider, and just to make sure that no data from other clients gets into the dashboards, I typically create a query that filters the data before it even gets to the dashboard. So there's no chance of data that clients shouldn't see getting in the dashboard. So the ability to just write a custom query behind the scenes is something I find really useful with Data Studio. And then if you have data that you've used in the past, it comes up with a pretty quick platform you can use. And then the other piece of Data Studio is the actual visualizations. So you have the ability to add any kinds of charts that you want. There's a couple of different places you can select from. So there's just basic tables if you need to do data exploration. You can make use of Google Maps, and this might be interesting to see if the way that the data is formatted for country, there's a geo ID if Google Maps can be used with some of those columns. And then pivot tables, so pretty similar to things that you would be able to do in Excel for just data exploration here. So the other piece of Data Studio is the controls. So what you're able to do is allow the user, all of Data Studio is really intended to allow other stakeholders to interact with the charts that you've created. So you're able to, what I try and do is create visualizations that are as broad as possible, and then provide all of the different ways that someone would maybe want to filter down their data. So I'll get started with just kind of a basic chart. Data Studio goes ahead and gives you a couple of examples. They're usually not super intuitive. They're just going to give you like one of your dimensions. And then I often see like the record count or something. So what I think we're interested in seeing is it might be interesting to look, let's have maybe a date field. And once you're working with date fields, you have the ability to truncate this as much as you want. So if you wanted to look at like by weeks, by months, Data Studio does a pretty good job of truncating your date down. And then if you wanted to, let's say, we can do computer is running a little slow. Okay. I'm just gonna make sure the data source is working. I also might change this field. So you're also able to change data types if you need to. So we were getting a data type for countries and territories of a geo code, but we could also move this to text. You also have the option, if you don't want to just remove that option, I can say, I can duplicate the data fields. And then I have one that's a text and one that's a geo code. So that can kind of help. And sometimes I'll like switch things from numbers to text if I need to visualize things or not have calculations be run. Cool. So hopefully that gives us a view. I'm going to switch to a pivot table. Maybe. Okay. All right. So we can look, and maybe let's do date on a column. So now what we can do is let's maybe look at the deaths by country. And then I think we want to sort by date. So we want deaths descending for our metric sort. And then we can also sort the columns as well. So it doesn't really make sense to have all of these months out of order. So we want to make sure that when we're working with dates that it is in some kind of logical sense. And you can start to see we're going to be able to like view some trend lines here. So I use these tables a lot for data exploration, or a lot of times I'm working with clients or internal stakeholders that just want to be able to work with the data, but they don't know SQL, right? So what I'll do is I'll prepare a view of the data that allows them to export and work with it in Excel. So once you've created a view for your client or whoever, they're going to be able to come in and export, or they should be able to come in and like start working with Data Studio as well. So that's always something that I think is helpful to like point out when you're showing people your dashboards, that they do have the ability to interact with the data and edit things as well. And so the next thing I usually want to do is add the interactive elements. So you have the option to add just a drop-down list. You can also do an input box where someone would just be able to type in what they want. There's a date range control where you're able to maybe specify if you only wanted to look at a certain time frame. You can kind of auto control what the defaults are. And then there's also a metric slider. So if we wanted to maybe say, you can slide between like any country that has deaths over any time frame that has deaths over 150,000. So that can filter down your data even more. And then there's also options to kind of like style. I like to maybe, add some color or something so that these actually look nice in addition to being useful. So Data Studio, in my mind, is really the best canvas. So a lot of visualization tools are pretty limited in terms of how you can design how your reports actually look, but Data Studio is really, really flexible in terms of actually getting what you want to see on the page. So we are also able to add multiple pages to our dashboards. And one thing to point out is for your viewer, you can actually specify like where their navigation should be. So I will often put my tabs up here, which is similar to like if you were browsing a website or something. So it's easy to understand that there's multiple sections. And you can also, when you're working with pages, you can create even sections that you can drag multiple pages into. And then on your header, you get like a little drop down here. So if we wanted this to just be like the export page, and then we can start building some other charts in here. So let's maybe look at some of the other possible charts that we could do. So I'm interested in seeing like the trend over time. So there's the option to do a time series chart or a smooth line chart, regular line chart. I like to do these line charts instead of the time series because there's a few more options for how you break down the data. And so I want to take countries off the dimensions and replace it with dates. I'm going to keep it at the date granularity to get a really specific trend line. So the other thing to keep in mind is that Data Studio doesn't automatically sort by the dates in the order you would think it would. So you do have to make sure that you have the dates going in the order that you're expecting. And then one thing I would want to do maybe is break out this trend line by country. So there's a lot of different countries here. And now that I'm looking at the metric record count, I need to actually put in deaths. Okay, so now we have some trend lines on countries' death rates in 2020. So when we're looking at this breakdown, we can kind of tell Data Studio how many dimensions that we want. So yeah, so you can say, I want to see 20 countries instead of 10, for example. And then if you wanted to like reduce, if it's like a really noisy chart, you can reduce the number of actual points. So it will aggregate, like if you have a bunch of different days, it might take the average between 2 days. Cool. So now we've got 20 countries and their trend lines. And we probably want to also provide drop downs here. Instead of redoing everything that I did from the past page, a lot of times you can just copy and paste. And if you're using the same data set, this gets tricky when you have like a bunch of joins and different custom queries that are behind different charts, because every filter is unique to just the data set that you're working with. But if you just have one data set, you can just copy and paste any of the filters that you wanted over here. And then maybe let's take a look and see if there's a maps element that might be interesting. So we are getting the geo ID and countries working. Perfect. So we're able to add maybe a color dimension by, let's say, maybe like the size of confirmed cases total. And then what I think would be interesting about viewing this, since we're looking at total cases, right? There's no like dates available here. But if we have like maybe a date range control, we can look at number of cases and where like at different time frames there were more cases. So I'm gonna zoom out. Maybe we can give them really custom choices for what dates to look at, but we could also we can set up maybe a drop down list that you can be like pretty specific and only let them look at like a month at a time or something. So you could just force them to look at let's look early. So we could zoom out and kind of see like early in the pandemic, you know, China had the most confirmed cases. And then, you know, in the most recent month, we also need to sort. You can also sort any of your metrics. So you can put metrics in your controls too. So this gives you the viewer, maybe like if we're doing like a sales drop down or something, you could see the most impactful dimensions first. With dates, I always just want to make sure the date's in order. But I do think it's like a cool little bonus to be able to see if you have confirmed cases or something like that here. And then you can also retitle stuff so it looks nicer for the viewer. So everything can be customized and none of the viewers have to see like any of your actual schema or something. The other thing to point out is you're able to add any filters. You don't just have to write a custom query if you want to filter the database. So while you can add filters here, your user is going to be able to see any of the data. Like if you didn't want them to see May, for example, like they still have access to like click on May if you use your filters out here. There is a way to start filtering your data. So if you filter your data behind the scenes here, the viewer won't be able to change or like look at any of the data that you have filtered out. So I could come in and let's maybe I don't want them to see any data for, I'll say, let's exclude let's exclude and so now we won't get any data for the countries that we excluded. So, and this is something that the viewer wouldn't be able to edit. So if we want to, if we went into view mode, the viewer is only going to be able to interact with what you allow the viewer to interact with. So any of the filters that you have put on the back end here, they're not going to be editable, and they're going to preserve like the data integrity that you want for your report. So always good to think about like what you want the viewer to be able to interact with and what you don't. Are there any questions on what I've shared so far?
I didn't want to get ahead of you. I was curious about the sharing, so I think you're as far as like the permissions and that kind of, yeah, can view and whatnot.
Yeah. So the permissioning is actually pretty straightforward. So you can add additional editors, you can add viewers, and you can do it. They have to be logged into Google with their specific email address. So one thing that's unfortunate is, like, if you add an email address, they really have to have a Google account with that email address. So
can you email this, share this with me for view only to my my D Walker?
Yeah. So
this is the brick wall we run up against with Power BI, because you can't really share outside of your organization very effectively at all. It really wants to keep your data sets and everything contained within your Office 365.
Do you have is it ACDS?
It's .co.
Okay,
not com. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'll goof around a little bit with that. When you share it with someone and you are sharing your access to your data set and they start, filtering and sorting and whatnot, is that hitting on your Google Cloud Platform cost?
It is.
It
Yeah.
is.
So the interesting thing about Data Studio is that it's free, right? So you are free to make any of the dashboards that you want. There's no cost to like having users or viewers, but all of the costs are incurred in the querying of your data set. So if you have like some reports that are using big data sets and they're not filtered, so like one thing that we do is, so we have a data set. Our company, we scrape Walmart.com. We scrape the top 20,000 like highest volume keywords on Walmart.com, and we scrape it every hour. So we're getting hundreds of millions of rows of data. And we have some visualizations of that data to show our clients where they were on the Walmart search grid at any given hour of the day. And what we have to do is, I have a custom query that just pulls the last 14 days of data so that the data set is smaller, and that is not incurring like query cost on the full data set. So you do have to think, like, when you're working with big data sets, how do you mitigate the query costs, and how do you make sure that when a user is interacting with your data set, that they're not going to be, it's not going to be charging your Google Cloud account too much.
Yeah.
No.
That would be a difficult, beg your pardon, hang on. That would be a difficult use case to tell someone if you were, a CIO. It'd be hard to go to the board and say, this is what our Google Cloud Platform is going to cost, because you don't necessarily know how much they're going to be interacting with the data and how much, you know what I mean, how intense that's going to be and how adoption will grow. And
yeah, so our company has grown very quickly, and so that's been something just recently that's been a lot of like the computing resources in Google Cloud, like you can do a lot before you start getting charged. So when they have like a free kind of exploratory plan, and if you stay under a certain amount of usage, you won't get billed. But it's pretty cheap. Like, I think in terms of query costs, even with like the massive data sets that we have, it's a really affordable, scalable solution. But I mean, if our data sets like 5x in size in the next year, then I don't know if that would still be true. So there's something that a lot of dashboard solutions do. I think it's called materialization. So what happens is that you create, you basically run one query that creates a subset of your data, kind of like I was describing with like pulling the last 14 days. So you basically create like an image of your table. And so Tableau does this. You, instead of having like a live feed where every time someone interacts with something, it pulls from your like live data set, you have like an image of your data set that gets queried from. And that reduces, instead of running like 100 queries a day when people are interacting with your dashboard, you're running one query in the morning to create like an image or a subsection of your data set that has the most valuable information that your stakeholders care about. And then you're not constantly querying your live data set.
Sure, because the query that creates the view they're using is computationally intensive, but then it's much
Yeah.
less so to hit that smaller subset. So
Yeah, exactly.
anybody else, guys, don't let me dominate the conversation. Questions from the group before we move on?
I guess I had more of like a business question. I was kind of wondering how exactly that charging them works. So like if they access their dashboard a lot and they're doing a bunch on it, do they pay your company more for giving them, like making that? Or how
Yeah.
does that work?
Yeah, so that's something that, like, what you would have to do is create different user accounts and monitor how much they're able to, how much query resources that they're using. So it's not something, it requires a bit of setup on the back end and a bit of work on like your permissioning to be able to say like, hey, this client is using this dashboard a lot. Like, they would definitely need to be logged in. If you just gave them like a view, so you can send people like just a view link where anyone with the link can view. If you do that, you really can't tell like who is like using the data the most. So Data Studio, I think, is really not the best solution if you want to do chargebacks where you're charging your clients for the dashboard usage. There are a lot of solutions that, like Tableau, for example, requires all viewers. I think they have a viewer's license that's $20 a month, I think, or $15 a month. So it's really up to the organization how they would want to charge that back. So in our case, we have like consulting agreements and like retainers, and we just provide like these dashboards as a part of that full like consulting package. So I would say like the pricing is built in, but we have sister companies that charge back like for data usage. So it's really dependent on like how your business's pricing model works, but it's certainly possible in Data Studio to like set things up in a way where you can tell who's using most of the costs or computing resources. But it does require a lot of setup on the back end.
Thank you.
Any other questions? This was most of what I had to share. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I use a lot.
Just have you ever queried using any other traditional RDBMS, MySQL, Oracle, whatever? Have you ever queried that many rows and seen the difference between BigQuery's performance even like on the public data sets, you know, I'm using my experience with BigQuery is just through the Google Career Certificate in Data Analytics. They, it's of course put on by Google, but it's pretty vendor neutral. But they do have you get into BigQuery and query some of these, and it's millions of rows, and you get your query results in, you know, to Mississippi. Have you ever, do you know how this performs compared to maybe Oracle or something?
Yeah, so my understanding is like Google has market leading cloud performance. So I would say it's probably like AWS and Google Cloud that probably have the best performance. I know I've given like some of the size of the data sets that we're working with. I've never had issues with any of like with all of the connections that we've set up with other tools in terms of data loading and downloading, like through the API even is really fast, which the API is much slower than just if you're querying directly, but I can still pull like 15 million rows and like through the API in 5 minutes. So yeah, pretty, I think it's probably a market leader.
Blistering fast. You know, compared, I mean, when you think of
Yeah.
the millions of rows that it's having to do calculations on in these public data sets. And there's plenty of tutorials out there, guys, if you want to learn more about BigQuery, and it's, Google's got its own Google standard SQL, just like we learned, you know, with MariaDB, it's a little bit different than MySQL, or a little bit different than Oracle. Definitely a little different than Microsoft SQL Server. So one thing, Laura, that has kept me from learning more, because we are a G Suite, whatever they call it now. You know, my ACDS email is actually Google, and we use Google Meet and video conferencing, and we use Gmail and Drive and all that stuff. But I can't find really much in the way of documentation or training on Data Studio or BigQuery. What have you learned, or what
Yeah.
sources do you have?
Yeah. So I kind of taught myself Data Studio. It's similar enough to Tableau, which is what I had more formal training on. It's similar enough that I like, if you have one visualization software, it's just a matter of finding where all of the knobs are. But BigQuery has pretty robust documentation, but it's very technical. So it's really hard as like a beginner to kind of get started. So a lot of what I did was Googling and like kind of figuring out like what other, there are like lots of data engineers that, you know, blog and talk through like how they set up certain solutions.
Mm.
So there's not a lot on YouTube, unfortunately, which is usually my go-to like learning platform. But there's a lot of great bloggers. So the learning curve is a little difficult to overcome, I would say, like starting out, but like it has, I think, an easier interface than most of the other, I mean, in terms of like getting up and running quickly, like Google helps you write your queries. I mean, it's user friendly once you actually have data to work with. It's just like the matter of like, if you're starting from scratch, if you're building your own data warehouse, which is what we've done, like figuring out how to configure all of that, set the permissions, set all of the APIs up. It takes a little bit of just classic Googling.
Yeah. It's not fair.
I know.
Okay, so what about recommendations for this course? I still use Workbench to teach you know, SQL syntax and table joins and function calls and that sort of stuff. You you've got to be biased because you're a Google, because you're a BigQuery user. But do you think it would be easier for this class or better or whatever to use BigQuery instead of Workbench? It's one less piece of software is the main thing I'm thinking of, but it also
Yeah.
gives you access to just a ridiculous amount of data to use for examples. What are your
Yeah,
thoughts?
I mean, I think a lot of students want, well, there's issues with, especially like if you're using company provided resources, like connecting to a server can sometimes be complicated because like if any company has a VPN, you're going to have trouble, like if you're hosting your own server, getting connected.
Mm.
So BigQuery, since it's not like creating a connection to your computer where you're having to like basically create like a protocol, like an HTTP connection. I think in terms of like just the getting set up and started and faster, it makes sense to use BigQuery. And then of course, like you can connect it. It's also a good way to start learning APIs, right? Which is kind of the next, that's kind of the next thing you should be able to do if you're gonna get more into data science or even analytics. It's really valuable to be able to learn how to like web scrape or like be able to pull data through an API. So the fact that Google has so many resources and APIs, like it's easier to work with, like once your once you're set up and working in BigQuery.
And you're doing that with Python, the API
Yeah,
call.
usually, yeah. So I use Python, and then I also use a program called NIME. It's an ETL, and it can help you like basically scale. It runs like pieces of code for you, so you don't have to like custom code everything that you want to do.
Okay, guys, questions from the group or comments? I'm curious what experience you had with Workbench. If there's a better way to do it for next time, not for you guys, for future students in this cohort or in this course. This thing on?
Sorry, I don't have any questions.
Okay. Well, Laura, I sure appreciate you coming in and showing folks yet another yet another tool, another way to do things. There's no end of folks that are willing to take your money to help solve your problems out there. So okay, guys, we will reconvene Thursday at 10:30. I'll send out a reminder email for Git and GitHub, and then we will conclude and get into project work. Any questions overall where we're at?
Yes, sir. I did have a question about the capstone project.
Uh-huh.
The due date is the 25th.
Yeah, that's our graduation day.
Okay.
August 25th between 9 and 11.
And I was reading the PowerPoint, and I was seeing all the stuff we needed. Do I have to document anything or have any documentation or anything like that?
Well, it's really just a presentation of going through, just like you've seen with when we did it, Excel, and when we did Python, the data analysis project, so that you're going through that entire circle. I met with Tammy and Sirkant about this. Has Sirkant set
Yeah,
up any sort of meetings with you and
Sirkant.
whatnot? Sirkant, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the documentation, and I'm sorry, Dexter, I might be reading too much into that term or that question. But no, it's really just the presentation, and you can use
Okay.
Excel charts and PowerPoint, or you can use Power BI tabs, or
Okay.
a Jupyter notebook, a Python Jupyter notebook. The way you present this this project, but yeah, paying equal attention to the business question, why you're doing the analysis, what you hope to learn, what are the metrics, what did the data look like, what you had to do to get the data, what you have to do to transform the data, the whole project, not just jumping right to the findings or the chart or whatever.
Okay.
So yeah, it's about 10-15 minutes each for everybody, between 9 and 11 on the 25th.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Cool. Sure.
Yeah, I had a question about the project as well.
Sure, Edgar.
So I remember we saw the PowerPoint when we had our meeting with Kendall.
Mhm.
Is that on the modules
Hang
in
on just
Canvas
a
as
minute.
well?
Let me fix that. Hang on. While you've got me, while I'm thinking about it right now, I don't believe so, Edgar, to answer your question.
Mhm.
Let me put it under foundations. I'll add a file, create file, choose file. Okay, at the bottom of foundations module, it's published. You should see the capstone project review in the Canvas classroom. Thanks for asking for that. I had
Okay,
meant
yeah,
to
I see.
make that public. Okay. So yeah, that's the slides I used when we were talking to your mentors. And if you have any questions, concerns, anything, going forward, let me know. Otherwise, I'll see everybody 10:30 Thursday. No other questions? Everybody's getting really close to caught up. If you're not caught up, please get that way, and let me know if you need any help. Okay, guys. See you Thursday at 10:30.
Sir,
Yeah.
thank you.